everybody, and welcome back to the Garage Gym PT podcast. Sitting with you as always, Lou is Dave. Um, Today, what Dave and I are going to talk about, we're going to talk about the principle of diminishing returns and then also the principle of reversibility. Before we kind of get into that, though, we hope you guys have been enjoying what we've been kind of talking about and, using some of the information that we've been providing. And if you guys want to reach out, maybe even have like a discussion with it, feel free to do that. But kind of diving headfirst into these principles here, we'll start off with the principle of diminishing returns. So think of it this way. When you first start training, right, you're going to make a lot of progress because it's a whole new game for you. You're going to see a lot of progressions early on. Maybe so for example, those first 1 or 2 years, you'll be hitting PRs like crazy because you're going to be making those gains. But then when you've had so many years of experience, kind of like we've said in the past, those PRs are going to become very few, and you're going to have to continue working for longer periods of time just to make those gains. Doesn't mean you're not working as hard as you were initially. It just means that you're going to hit that particular threshold where now you're going to need even more just to make those gains. Anything else you wanted to add to that, Dave?
Yeah, I think like establishing a definition on this is probably going to be the most important piece.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, you're going to be making progress until you're not, and then there actually becomes a detraining effect as a result of doing the same thing repeatedly. This is not to be confused with overtraining either. This simply states that if your program does not change, neither will you. And just as Lewis alluded to, when you are younger, you don't have any exposure, this is when you're going to have the highest magnitude of making progress, whether that be measured as a overall 1 rep max, a multiple rep max, body composition changes. Even in the endurance world, this is where you're going to see the biggest percentage of your time decrease as well. And you may be able to run this same cycle 2, 3, 4 times, getting, let's hypothetically say you run a 12-week cycle and it's the same exact program. You may be able to get 10% on your 1 rep max the first time. The next time you run it, it might be 5. The next time you run it, it might be 3. And then if you run it a 4th time, you may actually see a decrease in your overall 1 rep max because you do the same thing and your body has no stimulus for change.
That's a great point, Dave. So I guess the thing here is that as you kind of get more into the years of training, one of the things that you want to start doing is to be a little bit more analytical in your programming, and your exercise variation, right? So addressing those weaknesses, finding different ways that you can kind of create a new stimulus for growth. But then also maybe even doing periodic like tests and retests just to kind of see, is what you're programming, what you're doing efficient at basically moving you towards your overall goal.
Yeah, and even like defining newbie gains as well.
Mm-hmm.
The vast majority of it's more neurological and just learning the actual pattern. So you're not actually getting bigger and stronger or like growing your cross-sectional, fiber within your muscle mass. You're just learning to do things more efficiently, and your cerebellum's getting much better at repeating that pattern. So
Mm-hmm.
where you may have like a very hitchy squat, that first cycle, let's say, obviously if you're new, maybe you're squatting 200 pounds, which is not very, very outstanding. Just learning how to get out of the bottom and drive past the stick point can just automatically increase you by 25, 30, 40, 50 pounds. Did you get stronger? No, you're just better at squatting. So a lot of times that's why that magnitude is so high within that first handful of weeks of doing something.
Agreed. I think that's why, like with younger athletes, you could really throw anything at them and they're going to make progressions. So kind of moving away from the gym, Dave, let's go into more of like a clinic setting for a physical therapist. So how can we measure, or how can we I'm trying to think of how to put it. How can we be a little bit more analytical in the clinic with someone who does have such a high threshold for change? Let's say coming back from ACL. Um, when you have that type of athlete and that person who's used to such a high level of training, what methods or what have you used early on in rehab to start that process of kind of getting back into the game again? Because we're not going to see neurological returns necessarily. Um, that threshold for change for them is going to be different.
Yeah. One of my big, I guess, marks for ACL and post-op knee rehab is when the person says that they're comfortable going down steps. So it's
Mm-hmm.
much more subjective than it is anything else. Um, but exposing them to as much single leg as I can to to get them more confident with the eccentric control of their body weight. That for me
Mm-hmm.
is like something that really tells you when you can start to increase load, add complexity, do different things. Because like if you have the ability to control your body weight, that means that you can tolerate above and beyond. And I
I
mean
agree.
that's very specific for single leg because you can still squat and do wall sits and sled pushes and stuff like that before this ever happens. But that to me is like the first step in like knowing that you're headed the correct direction. Now that doesn't really happen unless you're doing all these back end pieces. Um,
Mm-hmm.
to even like move this to like maybe week one, month one, uh, I really just need them to feel their quad. Um, so we went off on tangents last week about like how 3 sets of 10 and just
Mm-hmm.
repeatedly doing this never changes the stimulus. It never does anything to um, create variation. It doesn't do anything to randomize the body's daily needs. So like if you're looking at trying to find quad contraction or even like get eccentric contraction out of a post-op knee, I find myself at the beginning doing as much static uh, contraction as possible, whether it be quad sets, TKEs, moving into like blood flow restriction training with doing a weighted long arc quad with a pause at the top so that they're recognizing terminal extension. Um, and the sooner that happens, the sooner they get onto steps and the sooner that they reach this threshold.
I agree. I do a lot of similar things, um, especially with like the initial just bringing that quad back to life per se. I do like using the. I feel like when you do have that person who has that high training age, sometimes quad sets are just so boring. Even just throwing on the blood flow restriction cuffs, um, just adds that little bit more stimulus for them. Sometimes I'll do Russian stim with the blood flow restriction training. That way we can kind of hammer that out, like literally sometimes day one, week one. Um, and they're like, "Oh, I'm actually doing something. Like this is fantastic." Um, the
Yeah,
one thing I think is more reining people in with that high level compared to like let's go. That's the hard part.
yeah, and this hypothetical person who has this high training age is also going to adapt to things much quicker because of the volume that they've had before. So when you
Hmm.
look at this setup, it's very ideal, right? I hate using this example, but it's like Adrian Peterson versus a high school girl who's 15. The guy could squat 600 pounds before he had a non-contact ACL. Uh, so like basically, day one, the guy's already full weight bearing, probably doing short and long arc quads without any patella pain versus the, you know, uh, stereotypical high school soccer player who has barely had any introduction to squatting or strength and conditioning.
Yeah,
So like, and I guess while we're on that, I'll go down this rabbit hole too. For whatever reason, there was this thought that you can't do leg extensions early in ACL because of the supposed shifting within your knee and like taking slack out of the ACL. But I'll start it as soon as possible to get that remodeling process of the actual tendon uh, to do it as well. And I find that like doing just basic weighted leg extensions also get blood flow to the knee, much like a sled would. And it's one of those places where you can really feel your quad contract, assuming you have terminal knee extension.
Yeah. The old open versus closed chain debate, I think sometimes gets a few physical therapists a little heated because they're like, absolutely no open chain whatsoever. Like, why would you ever do that? You're shearing forces. I was like, there's some good research out there now that really there's no discrepancy between the two. Um, you should be able to do both.
Well, do you not want your knee to be uh, protected against shearing forces? Is always like my argument to that.
Exactly. Thank you.
Like you have to expose it, otherwise it's going to get exposed elsewhere where you can't control it.
Yeah. If you're not prepared, you
Yep.
can't handle it. All right. It's just not going to be good. Um,
Well, let's kind of get more specific here. So, how are you specifically trying to avoid this detraining effect?
so kind of going down to what they were doing beforehand. Sometimes we have to have that discussion about, your old one rep maxes, your old times, you know, throw those out the door. They're good for reference points, but like where you are now, we're going to have to basically start from the ground up. So when you have that detraining effect, so like as long as that stimulus is now taken away from the person, I mean, it takes how many weeks to lose speed, power, strength. Um, the big thing, I think, are we still using the ACL example or just in general?
I would say like within your like own like ACL programming, like how are you avoiding them from having a plateau effect?
Oh, so I will use constant variations from
Yeah,
week to week.
yeah, not even talking about like percentage based training because I'm probably not even going to have that conversation until like month
Hmm.
5 or 6.
Yeah. So really to kind of help maintain whatever they've basically lost after surgery. I mean, obviously right out of the gate surgery, you're going to be pretty limited with what you can do. Um, but to kind of avoid that detraining effect, I love to have them before surgery, kind of getting into the blood flow restriction cuffs, maintaining as much muscle mass as possible, um, maintaining as much aerobic capacity as possible. I mean, obviously within reason, not trying to put them into more harm's way, but like I'm trying to still have them train before surgery so that they have the best range of motion possible, the highest amount of basically like quad mass before they would go into basically under the knife, and then trying to make sure that they have cardiovascular fitness. Because I mean, aerobic capacity is also going to translate into the healing rates, right? Because if they don't have great blood flow and they can't bring nutrients and oxygen into the area, you're just working against yourself. So like we'll actually start up a little program and kind of get them. Like I have a basketball player who he's a freak of nature. I kid you not, didn't lose like I think he lost maybe less than a centimeter of quad mass before his ACL surgery. And like literally as soon as he had that injury, was right in and we were working on blood flow restriction training and he was able to maintain his quad mass. So we were kind of keeping the stimulus for him up there pretty high. And then he went under the knife, had the ACL repair. And we went right into going into training the quadriceps as soon as he came out. And I mean, as soon as they told him to ditch the crutches, he was walking without any gait deviations. He was able to tolerate that eccentric loading off of a small step. And so he was like shocked. And I was like we're not going to push this. Like within reason, we're going to progress, but like you can't accelerate a healing timetable. I mean, within reason, but
Yeah, you still
you
have
you
to
have
go
to
by
like
about your 6 to 8 week rule.
exactly. You have to honor that. If you don't honor that, and you're just that's a red flag when people are like, we need to get you back to sport as soon as possible. And it's like we gotta honor that healing time for those soft tissues so that everything can kind of heal, become solid. But I will try to maintain that stimulus as high as I can and try to maintain strength within the quad activation, um, the aerobic capacity, even if it's just using like the UBE, getting up on that upper body ergometer. I will have them come in and we'll work on intervals. You want to get gas with your arms? Have fun.
We can have ski ergs at a lot of places too.
That is also a great one. Another thing that I like is just kind of emphasizing movement patterns. So I'm not just going to challenge you in a squat. I'm going to challenge you on a lateral lunge, challenge you on rotations when it's appropriate. Like moving in all three planes, that's got to become a really big thing right out of the gates that you can learn to move. And as you have that, you can apply load when it becomes appropriate. But then they already have the movement patterns down. It looks clean. It looks great. Then we can take off with loading.
Yeah, I think assuming that I have like all of the good markers, kind of maybe place yourself at like month 2 or 3.
Yeah.
I think I have a general kind of template that I like to use for most lower body injuries. ACLs are no exception to this.
Hmm.
I think typically I'm trying to get you on a bike, and if we have like an hour in an ideal world, you can do blood flow restriction twice on 2 different patterns.
Hmm.
Um, one quad, one hamstring, so that way you're really considering the diameter of the knee. But then like my primary focus is getting somebody specifically into a Bulgarian split squat and placing a ton of different variation on that. So like one week I may have you do I don't know, loaded on your opposite side. So we might use like a kettlebell. The next week I might have you load on both. The following week I might stick a safety squat bar on your back and have you do like a Hatfield variation of your Bulgarian split squat. But like I'm also trying to do other stuff behind it that's going to really increase the blood flow within the knee joint to promote that healing. Almost from like a knees over toe standpoint, doing a ton of sled work. I really like using wall sits to kind of progress knee flexion, going deeper towards your squat.
Hmm.
And then we're lucky enough, like in my clinic, that I can almost like create a finisher on like a K pulley, where like they kind of use like centripetal force to like create like an overspeed eccentric towards the bottom of the hole through like a pulley system. So that will kind of be my almost like fatiguing them out type of um, end. But in general, like my main lift here, I guess if you will, is always going to be like my Bulgarian split squat that I'm doing a combination of both closed and open chain things to promote as much mass around the knee as I can.
I like that a lot. Um, I don't necessarily have like a specific template I'll follow. Sometimes I'll kind of adapt and modify what I have in general, and I'll make it more specific to whatever that athlete was doing or needs to do for their sport or maybe their workout routine. So I'll kind of model it off of what is the need, um, and then I will pick my variation. I might change that variation every week, um, or maybe change the loading pattern where it hits them. Um, Maybe make it really hard, like in a particular sticking point or a particular section of the motion. Um, I know as I kind of go from like just general strengthening, and then I want to try to get my athlete back into like plyometrics. I want to make sure that they can handle. Really, they've got a good tolerance to a slow eccentric, kind of lowering themselves down an 8-inch box. But then I'll take them into that same Russian, the rear foot elevated split squat. I mean, and have them work on just quick drops, quick eccentrics, and kind of work on that landing. Basically, I guess initial start to that, and then I'll have them drop into that and then immediately come back up and out of it. So kind of taking that single leg and kind of progress that. And then I've also used for like 2 foot, I'll use a band assist for the hopping, just so that if let's say the eccentric or the landing section of that is just more uncomfortable, just for peace of mind to them, I'll give the band to help them just so they can kind of get that concentric section down, and then we can progress back into the landing if we need to, especially if it's like a patellar tendon.
Do you mean like hanging a band from a rack and then having them jump up
Yeah,
with the assistance of the band?
correct.
Yeah, and that could be really good too when you're trying to go for height for the compression. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, and I also do like notice. in anybody who has long-term rehab, there is a stick point right at that like 6 to 8 week mark where I do think that you start to get a little bit overtrained and just mentally frustrated with the process. So I will
Yeah.
almost tell people at the beginning, hey, around like this week, uh, you're going to get upset. And I'm actually completely cool if they just come in once and then take the whole rest of the week off.
Hmm.
Just because this is the sticky point too. Like we had talked about kind of that example at the beginning where you're doing a lot of the same stuff. It's getting repetitive. It's a lot of basic periodization and just making things 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 12, 3 sets of 15, overload, repeat, add something else to the program. But then you're still hitting a lot of similar exercises. So they just get kind of bored and frustrated. And then this is almost like a programmed deload. So that way they don't get detrained or actually allow recovery to catch up. So you can start to do harder pieces to the puzzle.
Hmm. So, like one example, I think of a therapist pushing a patient too hard. So, I'll use one of my old patients as an example. So, she had had a hamstring gracilis graft um, used to create the ACL, the new ACL, and
Yep.
her therapist really didn't have a huge, from what it sounded like, didn't really have a huge background when she was up at school with kind of working her back into weightlifting, and she was at so many months out. And when I looked at her program, I was like, oh, okay. They really weren't loading her much at all. And they kept emphasizing the fact that she's so weak. She's so weak. She needs to keep doing strengthening, keep doing strengthening. They wouldn't let her go back to plyometrics or anything, which I can understand why. Because when you look at her program, it was so pitiful and just it just frustrated the heck out of me. But the fact that they weren't stressing the muscles to a degree where there was going to be no progression. I mean, this is a college athlete. Like when you're sitting there doing 3 sets of 10 and there's never ever any load. So it's like you're doing a body weight squat, 3 sets of 10. You're going to hit that plateau real quick.
Yeah. I think we can all agree that if you're a running athlete, it's gonna be much better if you have a 300-pound back squat versus a body weight back squat. And it's going to
Yes.
serve to be more protective in the future,
Agreed.
especially when you get into that conversation of plyometrics. You know, the forces through your knee at any given time probably increase 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times your body weight. So if you're only doing body weight, you're kind of asking for injury.
Yeah.
I mean that there's a very delicate piece too, as far as like what's too aggressive versus what isn't aggressive enough. Uh, and for myself, I often try to use pain descriptors. So like if it's achy, I'm considering that joint remodeling,
Hmm.
especially if it's in that like 1 to 2 category and we're not drawing up too much swelling. Um, but if it's, you know, sharp stabbing, unstable, and then it's producing a lot of swelling, then you're probably on the other side of this positive stimulus. So that's also something where the patient has to be able to accurately communicate what they're feeling, and it'll inform us a lot better.
I agree. And that's where
Like,
communication comes into play there.
correct, because I'm always going to treat you as aggressively as possible, allowing pain to be your guide. People tend to get much better results that way.
Hmm.
But you do have to be smart about it. And every time that you think that you can do something, I would say wait 2 weeks before you even discuss it, and then let's talk about a way to lower the gate and do like the minimum effective dose, then keep raising it. Right.
Agreed.
So, you might feel like you can jump, right? So why aren't we just doing like, you know, line jumps? Then why aren't we doing some ladder drills? Then why aren't we doing jump downs from a box? Then, like you're saying, the band assist where you get the actual concentric and the control. And then why don't we actually talk about doing a box jump to a very low level?
Mhm.
And then from there, just obviously making it higher and higher and higher.
Those are good points, Dave. I think that if anything from this episode, people need to understand is that with surgery and with injury, you're going to have, I mean, it's going to happen because you can't maintain the high level of stimulus with training, but it's mitigating how much you lose or reducing the amount of time spent away from that high level of threshold. There are ways to help maintain the stimulus in a safe and controlled manner while also honoring the soft tissue healing times.
Yeah, and they can all be implemented a variety of ways. Like we mentioned, like that ton of examples in the split squat, but even just like a regular squat, right? Like if you have terribly weak quads, why aren't you doing a front squat then doing like 1 and 1/2s or something like that, to like where you're actually in the hole twice, putting strain on the tissue and really focusing on driving up out of the bottom. But basically, if you repeatedly do the same thing, you're going to get the same result or worse. So if you don't have exercise variation in your general program, especially in a rehab program, then that needle's going to not continue to move forward.
Correct. Correct. Uh, Anything else you want to throw out there, Dave?
Sure. As far as like this whole process is concerned, uh,
Mm-hmm.
you may not even notice it till you're about 80% of function, especially if you're coming off of a post-op ACL. I can get you the first 80% probably within 2 to 3 months, but that last 20% and the stuff that you consider high level, this is where all these principles really come into frame here, and having
Mm-hmm.
a strategic way to get you back to doing the things that you love with like adequate time to repeat them and load yourself is very crucial for making a successful rehabilitation process possible. I
I
would
agree.
much rather you be over prepared than anywhere close to underprepared, which innately
Mm-hmm.
in your head should say all those 6 month time frames that they laid out in your head may be the minimum effective dose to get you back on the field, but that does not mean it's gameplay.
True. True. And like just to kind of piggyback off that, I think that once we get them to that 80%, like you said, that last 20, sometimes it's nice when you have that ability to have that handoff to the strength coach, who also communicates on like a high level. So, Brandon, if you're listening to this, like this is the only time I'm going to compliment you, so don't even anticipate it again. But find yourself a Brandon Weirig, because as soon as or an Alex Trotter, because as soon as you have that ability to get them out of the clinic and into the gym more consistently, and you have a great communication between strength coach and the PT, it just makes the progress so much better, and it just makes it a smooth sail. Um, that's all you're getting, Brandon. That's all you're getting.
Yeah. I
But
mean, at this point, too, I almost feel like it should almost just be like them working with the strength coach and then possibly them spitballing ideas off of you. So that way they get one good opinion, not five different ones.
agreed.
So if the two parties don't match each other, it just drives doubt in the athlete's head. Then that can also be very sticky for them as well.
True.
So in my head, it's probably a two opinion max that you want to seek out, and you kind of want those to mirror each other, meaning that you treat people similarly, but there are small differences that can also help progress them.
Yeah. Teamwork makes the dream work.
Amen.
No, we hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Dave and I are going to talk a little bit more in the next episode about the principles of recovery. And we're going to talk about maybe some hypotheticals and some soft tissue healing rates and the strains and sprains of the body.
Yep. Hopefully you can find some low hanging fruit there and get back sooner, hit more training sessions a year, and get stronger.
Hell yeah. But we will see you guys in the next episode. Have a good one.